Set. Okay. Yeah, thanks, Morgan. I appreciate it. So our discussion today is going to be around developing effective indicators. And I really want to just put some recently published literature out there and kind of lead a discussion on the terminologies of leading and lagging indicators and some confusion around them, and really get the thought around, do we really need to assign a category of leading or lagging? Or can we use more of just a balanced scorecard approach on looking at action-based inputs to measure effective performance and safety based on some intervention strategies or whatever you're doing within your organization to improve safety? So that's kind of the takeaway today, is just to kind of stimulate the thought around indicators, how to apply them in your organization, and also how to right fit them for the organization. We're going to talk about that with the culture maturity of your organization and the complexity and time you're ready to commit to developing those indicators. So starting off, we want to just discuss measurement. We know measurement is the first step, right? If we can't measure something, we're going to have difficulties understanding it and controlling it and changing it, which is what all of our jobs are here. In most cases, is advancing the safety in our organizations and protecting the employees that we work with. So then we're going to get into the thoughts and terminologies around leading and lagging indicators and look at why lagging indicators have endured for so long and some of the challenges around those, but also some of the opportunities and also some of the challenges around applying what's more traditionally termed as leading indicators, or kind of what the push is to transition to as more the predictive indicators. We're going to discuss some recent history and some perspective on leading indicators through some published literature that's out there and some recent work that's been done, and then wrap up with some recommendations on how to develop those effective indicators, and most importantly, again, right fitting them for your organization and kind of where you're at in your safety journey. So I think we all agree that we have to measure to improve, right? I cited this out of a general professional safety article, but I think everyone's probably heard this a million times, is what gets measured gets improved, right? That's attributed many times to Edward Deming, who's a kind of one of the fathers of quality and process improvements. Another notable individual in the quality and improvement world is H. James Harrington, who has a pretty great statement: is measurement is the first step that leads to control and eventually to improvement. You can't measure something, you can't understand it. If you can't understand it, you can't control it. If you can't control it, you can't improve it. And that's the basis. I mean, that's the challenge for health, safety, and environmental professionals, especially in the health and safety arena, is what do we want to measure? Because we're trying to attribute what we're doing to the absence of something in a lot of cases, right? The absence of injuries. And that gets difficult. And that's why the reliance on traditional lagging indicators has been historically challenging, because you kind of celebrate when you don't have something happen, but you don't really understand if your intervention strategies or if your actions have improved things, or if things have not just happened because of chance, right? Or underreporting too. So how do we measure safety? What should we be measuring? What should we be looking at? What should tell us if the actions that we're taking, the money we're investing, the resources, the time, is that actually having a measurable impact on the health and safety and risk control in our work environments? Historically, it's always been based on lagging indicators, right? The lost time incident rates, the reportable, recordable incident rates, injuries, things like that. In my mind, I look at that as like looking in the rear view mirror when you're driving, right? So if you're driving down the road and you hit a pothole or you hit something and you think, wow, that sounded pretty bad on my car, you're kind of looking in the rear view mirror to think what you hit. The benefit side of that is you kind of know where you hit it, right? So left, right side of your car, you know the area to look at. You're trying to figure out what it was, especially if you reuse that road. You don't want to hit it again. But in the end, the damage is done, right? The risk has been realized. The injury has happened in a worksite environment example. So it's an outcome, right? So it's something that happened. It's something that's measurable. It's something you know happened. It's a known. But there's nothing you can do now. It's over. You can learn from it in the future, but it's an outcome that has happened. The leading indicators are more like looking at your dashboard. A lot of companies will even call their leading indicator charts or whatever they use their dashboard, right? So it's looking out in front of you. You're trying to realize risks and see them and avoid them or control them before they're actually realized or turn into a loss. The challenging part of this is you don't know what you're looking for, right? It's a wide open space. There's a lot of things you can target. And I think this is where a lot of organizations or a lot of safety professionals get lost, is you're trying to look for everything and you're trying to cover all aspects of all risk, when you probably really could get a little more defined and target your vision to a more specific area, either that's going to have a marked improvement or one of your highest hazard areas that could really help you. So what I want to kind of get into today is more of a balanced approach of utilizing your lagging indicators, your outcomes, but also implementing some leading indicators, or what I want to stress is action-based indicators, something that employees actually have control of, something that they can put actions into and change. Unlike an incident or reportable or an injury that has already happened, these are actually things that if you start to see them trailing down or not performing, you can put corrective actions in to bring them back up. Or if you see them performing extremely well, you're not measuring the absence of something, you're measuring actions, and you can actually get positive recognition and positive reinforcement to those employees that are doing them. So just to kind of talk through lagging indicators, they're always looked at as trailing, retrospective, rear view, passive, stuff that's happened, right? The good thing about these is they're very definable. Total recordable incident rates, lost time, days away from work restricted, work compensation claims, experience modification rates. These are calculated values that have known formulas that people, especially executive level and manager level, fully understand. You can compare them, you can benchmark, you can track them. They've been around for a long time. They're easily understood. The challenges with these are, again, you're measuring the absence of something. So if you're reinforcing individuals with incentives on these to get the absence of something, you can just not report, right? So if there's bonuses, if there's performance-based objectives based on these hard numbers, if there is a way to possibly not report them, they can be not reported. And I mean, OSHA has seen definitely an instance of that on those industries that always go to strive to zero or target zero. They can also lead to overreaction, right? If even if you don't have a zero target, you have a reduction target, and you start to experience some injuries, maybe they're even minor injuries with low severity, because your quote unquote numbers going up, there can be a lot of attention and action paid to maybe a low risk action where you're focusing on something just because you're getting numbers when there may be bigger risks out there that you could better focus your energy and resources on. And finally, also an absence of injuries, even if they are all being reported, does not mean proper hazard control. If you think of like the Swiss cheese example, where the hazard comes through the different holes in the Swiss cheese, eventually if things line up the right way and your holes are big enough, you could actually realize a risk, and it could be pretty significant, like a fatality or serious injury. So just because nothing has happened or nothing has happened for a while doesn't mean you're controlling risk properly. It just means by chance you haven't realized that risk yet. So using them really are not ideal, but we've relied on them for a long time because, again, they're very definable, very repeatable, very easy to benchmark, and compare industries and compare sites and things like that. Leading indicators are more prospective. They're more forward-looking. They're more looking at actions again. Training, incident reporting, safety-related suggestions, JHAs, JSAs. They're things that you can influence people to do, right? So if you see a number of incidents or a number of these indicators coming down, you can start to give coaching, you can start to give feedback. Again, if you see the numbers up high, you can give positive reinforcement and spontaneous recognition to those employees that are actually outperforming your targets with these. But the challenge with these is, unless you make them overly complex, which we're going to talk about, if you stick to just number totals of how many times someone did something, people can start kind of playing a game with it, right? And the quality of what they're doing can go down. So if it's number of inspections completed and you have a target, you can have employees that are far exceeding that target, but maybe they're doing very poor inspections. Or if it's trainings, maybe they're doing a number of trainings, and maybe the trainings aren't focused on any of your high risk areas. They're just doing trainings to get numbers up. So there are downsides or pitfalls with these. One example that's referenced in a professional safety article is the Wells Fargo 8 is great. It's not safety related, but it's performance based related. It's where Wells Fargo had a requirement for their employees to sell 8 new products to all their existing customers, and really held their performance to that. And they ended up falsifying information, signing people up for stuff they didn't want. And it led to a significant incident for Wells Fargo because they tried to drive this action-based target. So you got to be careful with them. They got to be tightly managed, and that's where some of the complexity comes in, and also the culture of your maturity of your organization, because you can't force fit one of these action-based incentives if your company is not ready for it or doesn't have the resources or skills to implement them. We're going to talk about that later on. Also, there's a lack of standardization, so you really can't benchmark. So if you develop these in-house, these forward-looking or leading indicators, you can't go to your executive team and say, hey, we're doing better than another company within our same industry, because we don't know how they're tracking their forward-looking indicators. And even if you did try to coordinate that, there are a lot of nuances around them that may be significantly different. So it's not like you can compare an incident rate from one company to another company and say, yeah, we're doing better or they're doing worse. So a lot of times it gets hard, because a lot of times companies like to benchmark. They like to say that we're better than our competitors in other areas, but with safety, it's a little more difficult. It should be a little more inward looking. You should be more focused on where your risks are, what your actions are, and what you actually want to change. So the Campbell Institute, that's associated with the National Safety Council, did a study back in 2013 around leading indicators. And some of the results they found were not surprising, but they definitely present some challenges, is around the technical knowledge of leading indicators. Where HSE professionals, or in the purple-blue bars there, you can see are more on the right side of that chart. So they feel they're competent or proficient in understanding what a leading indicator is or how to develop a leading indicator. What's not so good is for the executive level, over half of them were at the advanced beginner or beginner stage of understanding what a leading indicator is. So executives have a hard time standing behind leading indicators because they really don't understand what they are. And again, because there's a higher level of complexity with them than there is straight out calculated rates, right? So this knowledge gap is a concern, because it's hard to task leaders in a company with something that they're unfamiliar with. And that was seen with the same study. They looked at who's accountable for these leading indicators. And it generally fell on the HSE or EHS, the safety person's position within the company, to execute these. And that's not the way that these can work. They have to be shared accountability from executive level down across the organization at all levels, because the HSE person or EHS person is not going to be the one that's going to be able to execute these across all levels. But executives are not going to have the want to assign accountability to themselves on something they don't understand. I mean, that's obvious, right? So the knowledge gap is there. So they're not going to say, yeah, I'm going to be accountable for this, and it's going to be used to assess my performance, when I really don't understand what you're trying to do or measure here. So that's a problem when there's that knowledge gap and also that accountability between the two. And I mean, I've seen that personally, where an HSE department or health, safety, environmental department will come up with these great indicators. And then the executive levels will say, yeah, they're great, but now you own them. They're your responsibility. And if I don't see them trending upward, or if they're trending downward, you're going to be held accountable for it. That's not the way that can happen. It needs to be implemented across the organization. There has to be a common level of understanding of them. And that's where I mentioned about complexity, is if your organization is not ready for overly complex indicators, you have to keep it kind of simple. You also have the right culture maturity, which we're going to talk about. They did note that even though there was this difference in understanding and accountability, they believe that leading indicators would increase over the next 5 years. And keep in mind, this study was in 2013. ERM, a global safety consultant, did a survey in 2018, which is about 5 years. It wasn't a repeat on the same exact companies, but it was across numerous industries globally. They didn't find a heavy reliance on leading indicators. They found 70% of respondents still use lagging indicators, and only around 26% used any form of leading indicator. They repeated the study again in 2020 and found only 8% using leading indicators. So they didn't really see a growth in it. And a lot, I would believe, is attributed to the lack of understanding of actually what a leading indicator is, how to provide them, how to shape them, and then how to apply them within your organization. So why are we struggling with this? Why are we struggling with our use? We all know lagging indicators aren't the best way to measure safety performance. I think we can all admit that, but right now, for lack of a better way to do it, that's the way it's kind of being done. One of the big reasons, and this was just published in 2023 in Professional Safety, is there's still an admitted limitation in the agreement, even among people in our profession, on what a leading indicator is. We can't come up, even with our own profession, a single definition for what a leading indicator is. That's going to be a challenge when you're trying to use these, and you can't even reference it and say, hey, this is exactly what a leading indicator is. If you look at different textbooks, different articles published, you're going to see different things. And I think that's where some of the differences in knowledge occurs between EHS professionals and executives, is when you start trying to explain this to an executive and they're asking you to show you what exactly this is, and you say, well, it's kind of not specific and it's going to be kind of specific to organization, they kind of drift away from it. I just wanted to run through an example of this to kind of show why some of the confusion I think comes up. So if we look at if we try to put two buckets up, right, lagging indicators and leading indicators, we took some common indicators that all industries use, like lost time incident rates and illnesses, injury rates, property damages, transferred restricted work days, lost work days, vehicle incidents, near miss reporting, training numbers, safety observations, inspections, and safety meetings. If we try to break these up and try to set them up, I think we'd all agree kind of the losses or the lost times or anything that experience a loss would be lagging. Training or things that are not attributed with a loss, again, action-based, would be considered quote-unquote leading. Injury rates, numbers of property damage, safety observations, again, that's action-based. There's no loss. That's an employee going out and doing something. That would probably be considered leading. Equipment checks, again, action-based. It's doing something. It's not an outcome. It's an involvement by an employee actually completing something. Same as safety meetings, completed versus planned. That's something, again, if it's not happening as targeted, you can go in, provide coaching, and you can kind of bring that number back up. Where property damages, lost restricted work days, transferred days, vehicle incidents, those are all lagging. Those are things that have happened. Once they happen, there's nothing you can do to fix them except learn from them. The one that usually sticks, or the one that gets debate, or the one that I read the most debate on, is near miss reporting. Where would you put near miss reporting, as lagging or leading? Lagging because something happened, obviously, but maybe by chance, by some event, there was no loss occurred, but there was a failure somewhere in the system and something happened where somebody almost got hurt, a property damage almost occurred. But because nothing occurred, would you consider that leading? And I've read a lot of debate about this. I've had a lot of debate about this. Most times that goes in the leading category because most people try to draw that hard line between did a loss occur, did a loss not occur. But I would argue that that line can get even fuzzier when you start really digging into things. And maybe there even isn't a need for a line. And that's where I'm kind of asking to walk away from this is rethinking the terms, what they are, and even if they're needed. This Don Daly is quoted in a Fred Manuel article in Professional Safety. He was a president of this Gallatin Steel. He was recognized for his kind of innovative thoughts from an operations perspective around safety. And his statement is, why is it important to conduct thorough accident or incident investigations? Because you can learn from accidents and incidents. Injuries are lagging indicators in that they already happened. However, if we consider them in terms of probability of a similar future incident and use what we learn from them to change our process, then we are treating them as leading indicators. I think this guy got it. He kind of understood that we don't want to just look at a number in terms of accidents or incidents as a lagging indicator, and we have to count that as a tally. Let's break that down. Let's get more complex. Let's look at accident investigations or incident investigations as a leading indicator. But again, we're increasing the complexity now, right? So historically, we just have a number of accidents or incidents that happen. Now we're going to look at how many incident investigations were actually done. You could even make it more complex and looking at were incident investigation, how many actions were taken from an incident investigation? So how many follow-up actions were taken? You could even make it more complex on doing follow-ups, maybe a 3-month, a 6 months, a 1-year checkup on are those actions still in place after an accident investigation has occurred. So you can actually turn that lagging indicator, quote unquote, into a leading indicator, but the complexity increases, the time increases, but you're getting a better measure point out of it. And again, it's action-based, right? So it's how many actions are coming out of an accident investigation. Are those actions staying in place? We can look at any kind of incident as after the fact that lag behind some sort of organizational deficiency. So you can even turn some leading indicators into lagging, right? A lot of people are really rooted in behavior-based safety programs, and safety observations have historically been looked at as a leading indicator, right? But if you see an unsafe act, or even an unsafe condition in a work environment, that means somewhere a system deficiency exists, right? That employee was either not trained properly or they're not following required guidelines. They're choosing to act unsafe. So could you not look at an unsafe observation as a lagging indicator as a result of a system deficiency that's happening within your organization? So there's a lot of published literature out there that really challenge these definitions of leading versus lagging and kind of how they're used. And I think this is why sometimes the confusion happens around trying to draw that clear line between what's leading and what's lagging. So really, instead of worrying about that, an interesting perspective could be more looking at more of a balanced scorecard where you apply both. You can call them leading and lagging, or you can call them kind of inputs and outcomes. And if you set tangible, measurable objectives and balance those between outcomes and action-based inputs, you can get a better idea of how your actions are actually changing the way your work environment is, and if it's reducing risk, right? What you should do instead of setting broad-based numbers is be more specific. So target where you can get some, what Fred Manuel calls in one of his articles is breakthrough performance. Where can you find a high-risk area, apply some intervention strategy, and track performance? So Manuel makes a good point in that safety practitioners seldomly indicate they have identified and focused on one critical operational process, nor do they incorporate statistical progress measures in their systems. If you look at quality control, that's usually very statistically oriented and very focused. So the theory here is pick an area where you know you need change and set specific objectives and set specific indicators around that area and measure that and try to fix that, not trying to fix the whole of the organization. So if you're looking at your dashboard or out your window, you're focusing on one thing, not that entire dashboard. The Campbell Institute study has kind of the same idea. They're recommending 3 categories. Is either you focus on your operations base, your infrastructure, like machinery, processes, things like that, or you can focus on systems like management systems, HSE systems, and look for failures in your system or improvements, or behavior. You can look at people. So you can develop multiple indicators around specific areas, but again, you got to be careful balancing the complexity and where your organization is at. But so essentially the message is don't try to fix everything all at once. Pick an area and develop indicators that are very focused on those areas and what you're trying to fix. When you're working to develop these indicators, make sure they're actionable. Again, they shouldn't be just hard outcomes. Many places set the goal as 0, right? That should be obvious. If you have to tell your organization, don't hurt people, or your supervisors, don't hurt people, or your employees, don't get hurt, you have probably the wrong people working for you. Nobody comes to work wanting to get hurt. No supervisors want their employees to get hurt. No CEOs want their employees to get hurt. That's a common sense mindset. The key is, what do you do? So you tell organizations or you tell people, hey, our goal is 0. We're going to get to 0 incidents. There's no action that they can take to get there, right? Besides tell people to be safe. You want to give them an action to do and tell them, hey, this is going to reduce risk, which is going to lead to people not getting hurt. They have to be achievable. And that's the discussion I want to get into now of building the indicators around where your organization is. They got to be meaningful. They got to actually have some meaning behind what you're trying to accomplish. Transparent. Employees have to understand what you're trying to do. It's like when you're conducting behavior-based observations, if you're looking at that, you have to be very clear to your employees. You're watching their behaviors. You're going to give feedback on positive behaviors, and you're going to give consequences for undesired behaviors. They have to be explainable. Again, let's close that link between executives and HSE. They have to be understandable across all levels of the organization, or no one's going to take accountability for them. They got to be valid, useful, and timely. There has to be immediate or almost immediate feedback around how people are performing with these targets. And that's where some of the complexity comes in, because there's a huge data management function as they get more complex. Make sure before you set these indicators that you have the ability to implement them. Your organization's ready for them, and you can actually calculate them, and you can actually provide them back to the employees that are responsible for them. When we're talking cultural maturity, I'm sure a lot of you in the profession has seen the DuPont-Bradley curve. Essentially what that is, it describes where your organization's mindset is as a whole. There may be pockets of some throughout your organization, but where your organization is as a whole on safety. If you're in the reactive stage, you got very disgruntled employees or employees that are really not bought in on safety and don't believe that any kind of safety procedures or processes are going to keep them safe. If you're in that stage of your cultural maturity in your organization, you're going to have a really hard time with overly complex leading indicators, because employees are not going to buy in. They're not going to do a whole lot. And remember, the more complex you get, the higher up the chain you get, they get more action oriented. If you're not going to have employees that are willing to participate, you're not going to get a lot of engagement or action. As this curve moves to the right, you get dependent. Those are employees that follow systems because they are the rules, right? They don't really believe in them, but they'll do them because they like their job. They don't want to get in trouble. They don't want to get fired. Here you can get into more tracking a little bit. You can get into numbers-based recording on some leading indicators, if you want to call them that. But you're not going to get a whole lot of engagement or a whole lot of quality out of them, because employees are just doing them because they're told they have to. Once you start getting into the independent stage, that's where employees actually believe what they're doing is keeping themselves safe. Here you can start getting feedback. You can start actually getting more advanced indicators because you have employees that are bought in and ready to take action. If you get to the interdependent stage where they believe that employees are working together to keep each other safe, that's when you can really get into the high level indicators. That level of maturity is difficult to get to as a whole in a company. But if you can even get to the independent stage and your company is that advanced, you can actually have some pretty effective indicators. You also have to take in complexity. Very low is just number tracking, right? Totals. How many of this were done? How many of this were expected? That's pretty easy to do. If you want to start getting into kind of ratios or breaking it down by hazard, you need someone to manage that. Whether it's your HSE professional, it's supervisors, you have to dedicate time to that resource to do that. And they have to have the ability to do that. And systems, whether it's as simple as an Excel spreadsheet or a complex computer software system that you purchase or develop, you have to have the resources to do that, and they have to be able to use that. So giving you some examples of some indicators you can put by maturity and complexity. If you look at the y-axis here, it's complexity. So this is how hard it is to track this indicator. If you look at the x-axis, it's organizational maturity. This is kind of where your people's heads are at and what you can actually accomplish at that level. If you start here down in the lower left-hand corner, a very reactive culture, employees that that don't really believe in safety policies, procedures, and you have low ability to implement complex processes or procedures, you can still do some more proactive or actions-based indicators. You can track the number of observations, safety observations, number of near misses, number of inspections. So you can get a hard number. Again, the quality might be low, but you can start to actually push that culture over by telling employees that, hey, I'm setting an expectation. I want this many of these done a month. Again, you can bring quality in later, but you got to start somewhere. Start small. Use the kind of the plan, do, check, act cycle, right? Plan something, just get out and do it. Check and see how it's going, and then act and make it better over time. If you want to make it a little more complex, you can start taking those observations and coding them. These are just examples, but maybe you can code them by hazard or by head count even. So you can say, okay, there was this many fall risks that were observed. There was this many confined space risks that were observed. You're starting to improve the quality a little bit, right? You're pushing the employees to put a little more information in, but you're also having somebody dig through all that data, code them, report back. So you're getting a little more complex, a little more use of resources, but you can still be working with a reactive culture in this. You really can't get any highly complex in this area because you're still in that reactive culture. If you're trying to push for more quality or more data in this area, you're probably not going to get it because the employees are not going to be that engaged or really that supportive of it. If you get into a dependent culture, that's again where employees are told to do things, they'll do it because there's consequences. You can tell them, hey, we want people trained in something like behavior-based safety observations. You can start tracking, hey, the number of people that I got trained and the percentage of our workforce that's trained. Again, it's very simple. It's just total number of trained. You can just keep that in a spreadsheet, keep that in a totalizer or something like that. If you want to get a little more complex in this, you can say, all right, I'm going to track the number of employees that personally engaged by supervisors and walk around. So the number of times or number of employees that a supervisor actually went out and talked to about a safety related action. This is getting a little more in the details, right? Supervisors are going to have to keep a track of who they talk to. They're going to have to give that data to somebody. Somebody's going to have to analyze that data, report it back to somebody, share that information, give feedback around it. So you're getting better data, but you're getting a little more complex with it. You can get really complex and start doing ratios of proactive observations to near misses and incidents. This is where we're actually tying an action to an outcome. Your action is the proactive observations done by the supervisor. They're going out, they're having discussions, they're talking, and then you can start tracking how many near misses or incidents or outcomes that are happening. And you can start to see, are these observations having any kind of impact on the number of near misses or incidents that are occurring within a department, within a site, something like that. But now you're starting to draw correlations, you're doing ratios. Somebody has to be managing this data as part of their day-to-day jobs. Again, it's getting more complex, but you're getting more out of it and you're tying an action to an outcome. If you get to the independent stage, that's where employees are actually bought in. They want to do things. They feel that they can help keep themselves safe. You can do things like number of assessments to determine the type of training needed. So how many times do you go out and ask employees, what training do you need? We're getting more specific now, right? Instead of management saying, okay, we need to knock out these trainings this year, you're actually going out and asking employees, hey, where do you see the risk? What trainings do you want done? And you can start tracking how many times you actually go out and ask the employees for this information and starting to get them engaged. If you want to get a little more complex here, you can do number of hazard assessment or percent of hazard assessments that's been communicated and verified as understood by the workforce. So not only how many hazard assessments that you did, you think about that in maybe the low complexity reactive stage, you can just track the number of hazard assessments that you go out and do. You're getting more complex now. You're actually going out and saying, okay, to your employees, I've done 10 hazard assessments. Here's the information we found. Here's the controls we put in place. Do you understand them? You can do things like pre and post tests on them. This is actually taking an action and turning it into an outcome and seeing if employees understood what's being done, the actions put in place, and the controls have been put in place. But again, you're starting to get into a lot more complexity, a lot more time, a lot more resources dedicated to this. Once you get on the interdependent stage, you can apply some really high-level complex indicators, but that stage is really difficult to get to, where you actually have everybody working together as a team to improve health and safety. So in interest of time, I didn't put a whole lot of examples out there because I'm going to bet most organizations are probably in the independent stage, but you can reference that article there by the Campbell Institute that outlines these examples, and it's in the references in the deck if it's sent out later. But really the questions I want you to think about for your organization is, where is your organization in terms of maturity? So think critically and think of where you're at. Where do you see the bulk of your employees' mindset? Do you believe that they believe in safety policies and procedures? Do you believe they do them only when they're being watched? It's dependent on basically consequences. Do you believe that they will take actions on their own to keep themselves safe and they will be supportive, or do you believe they're working as a team to keep the organization safe? And that's where you can start thinking about, where can I develop my indicators? You also have to ask, what level of effort is your organization ready to commit? How much time of your day could you spend to analyzing and organizing data? How much time could supervisors spend on that? Because that's going to be a concern. It's going to be a required resource. To get better, it takes commitment, right? It takes time, money, and hours. And you got to make sure they're available to get to these higher levels. So just to kind of close out here is, when you're developing these, you need to align all levels of the organization on the use, and you need to be committed to these metrics. So we talked about how there are difference in accountability in some levels from that Campbell study. That can't happen. Everybody has to have the same level of commitment around these indicators, and they have to be ready to execute them and be held accountable for them. Create that balanced scorecard. Get some actions or activities you can call your leading indicators and tie them to some outcomes. So really push the actions to your employees and have them complete the actions and see if it's making a noticeable change, and be as specific as you can. So try to align your outcomes around the actions you're taking to improve, whether you're looking at confined space programs, fall protection programs, HASCOM programs. Try to be specific on what you're improving and want to improve and not be too broad. Ensure your indicators are appropriate for your organization. Again, don't try to force fit an indicator for a high culture maturity in one that's not. It's going to be a failure in the end. Start small, be specific, and do something. Just grow. Use plan, do, check, act. Get some sort of indicator out there. Get some sort of action happening, and see and let it grow. If you're in a bad position in terms of culture maturity, start tracking some numbers. Don't worry about quality at that point of the numbers. Just get numbers and then worry about quality later. Keep improving. And really try to integrate this into your safety management system or other management processes. Don't make it a standalone system. It can't be the safety indicator program, and then all other company indicators are kept somewhere else. It has to be in with the rest, and it has to be looked at as important as other indicators of success for the business, right? So all the focus can't be on how many injuries you had, but you have this little indicator program out there where you're doing observations and things like that. It has to be brought into with other key performance indicators of the company. So with that, I can open up to any questions or any thoughts anybody had on the slides.
If you have a question, you can unmute your mic or post it in the chat, and Dr. Jackens can address it. My name's Ernie Smith. I'm with Columbia Southern University. We are a partner with Yellowbird, and as a partner, as a organization, that if you are have a relationship with Yellowbird as well, we do have some benefits you can qualify for that I'll go over real quick. Does anybody have a question before I give you some CSU info? If you do, just chime in. This will be our informal part of the presentation. Joe, if you want to unshare, I will share my screen and just give you just a little insight. This is our campus. We're in Orange Beach, Alabama, 100% online program. We have associates through doctoral degrees in occupational safety, business administration, organizational leadership. So these are all the different areas that we have. We actually just launched several new programs today. We now have an accelerated BS to MS program where you can get your bachelor's and master's in a faster time frame. So lots of different degree options for you and your employees. Couple of the big advantages to CSU: we are 100% online. Classes are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. No group projects. Textbooks are included in your tuition. Two of the biggest advantages, I think, we're not on a traditional semester system. So we have 11 start dates across the calendar. You can start on any one of those dates. And then we are very transfer friendly. So we will transfer in previous college work, of course, but we also look at job training in addition to college classes. So we'll give you credit for OSHA classes, HAZWOPER training, FEMA certificates, Microsoft certificates. So a lot of certificate programs and job training type courses that you've taken, we will evaluate that for credit in addition to college work. And then since you're taking advantage of the partnership that we have with Yellowbird, you get a 10% tuition discount. Makes you eligible for some exclusive scholarships that we offer. We have a transcript request service where we will actually go get your official transcripts for you if you want to transfer those into our program. If there's a fee, we pay that fee, and you're under no obligation till you actually enroll. And once we get all that stuff, military record, if you're in the military, sometimes we can get you credit there. We'll put your training, your college work, your military training together. We'll tell you exactly what transfers and how many hours it'll take you to finish. All that's upfront at no cost. So if you want some more additional information, let's see. One second. Well, I think Morgan put my contact information in the chat. You can get it there, or trying to get my slide to advance here.
Your contact information is in there. We can also include it in an email that'll go out to
Okay.
everyone who's attended as well.
Great. Well, that's really all I had. If anybody has questions for me, I'm happy to answer those, or for Joe, or if not, we thank you for your attention and your attendance, and look forward to talking with many of you in the future.
I did see one question pop up on what tools do you recommend for keeping accountability of indicators? That's a great question. There are a number of online platforms out there, or software systems that I've seen, EHS Insight, things like that. The downside of those can be, one, the cost, and two, the lack of customability with them. If you really want to get into these indicators complex and site specific, you probably want some customization, and you're limited with that with the online resources or the out of the box packages. And if you do get that, you're going to pay for it. It's going to be fairly expensive. I historically, maybe a little more old school, have highly relied on like Excel programs, Microsoft Excel, because I can kind of build what I want with it. But again, that goes to what level of complexity and ability you have within your workforce. I'm pretty proficient in Excel. If you have somebody that's pretty good with it, with developing macros, things like that, I would recommend, if you can do it within some sort of system within your organization, if you can build it into like an internal data management system that's being used for other functions, that's ideal. I've been with organizations that's done that, because you think about managers, they don't want to go into a separate system, right? They don't want to go in, they're pulling their process numbers, their efficiency numbers, their financial numbers. If you can throw the safety related information right in there, and you got the calculations done in the background, that's ideal. But many times that's a little bit hard to do and complex. You got to have some internal IS skills to build those. And in terms of getting the information from the field back to some sort of reporting system, there's always been challenges associated with that. The easiest, of course, is the paper format, but that's cumbersome. It takes resources to prepare it, to get it out there, to track it. I've seen a lot of things done recently with like iPad and apps. A lot of freelance developers out there we've used in the past at some of the organizations I worked at to make customized apps to do that. So there's numerous ways to do it. Depends on what kind of resources your organization has and ready to commit to it. But I think there was a question on how Yellowbird can help too. So maybe I'll let that to Morgan.
Yeah,
That's
no,
the slide I was trying to find, folks. So if you want to jot my email down, I think Morgan put it in the chat too. So if you want more information on CSU or anything else, you can reach out to me. If you have someone you know of at your company that really needs to get their CSP and needs to finish their bachelor's degree, you're welcome to share that information with them as well.
Perfect. Yeah. And thank you. I think you definitely answered the question, Dr. Jackens. So thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who joined today. Again, an email will be going out with all this information. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate your time.